I'm all good, mate. I'm all good.
Jesus, dude, it's been a fucking age, hasn't it?
I know. Where are you these days?
I'm in Potsdam, Germany.
Oh, are you? Cool.
Yeah, yeah. Been here for, I don't know, it's going on almost 6 years now.
How
And
is it?
yeah, it's good, dude. It's good. I mean, we've got a little young family, so it's kind of very conducive to that life and
Yeah.
safe little place. A lot of parks and lakes and everything around.
Nice,
So,
man.
yeah. And you? Are you whereabouts are you in Leamington?
Well, no, I'm in a village just outside. I moved out. God, how long ago was it? 6 years ago, something like that. Just decided that we would get a lot more for our money if we moved outside of Leamington, which has proved to be the case. And I've been there. I moved a couple of times, and I've been here for like 2.5 years, or nearly 3 years actually, because I moved when I left JLR. I then moved like 2 days after the end of the actual physical end of my employment, and it was like Christmas, the day before Christmas Eve. And then
Jesus.
started at Geely on January the 4th, I think it was.
Oh God. Yeah, dude. Everybody gets seduced by Leamington, and it's obviously there's a fair bit happening there for given how small it is. But yeah, it's pretty expensive, isn't it?
It's pretty crazy, yeah, yeah. It's that, and that's why, because you've got everybody from JLR, Aston, all the different places round and about just kind of congregate in that area, don't they? So
That,
it just drives the prices up.
but doesn't it get too much eventually? Like where you can't even go buy your shopping without bumping into
Yeah.
colleagues, or do you like that?
Yeah, no, it's pretty bad, especially if you've had a shit day, or if something's
Yeah.
not gone well, and you're like, I just want to go and be anonymous somewhere, and like you say, you're going to bump into somebody. So
You just want to go buy
yeah,
your eggs and
exactly.
just yeah.
Yeah,
Or
the number of times I've been in a supermarket and you're packing shopping and you look up and you're like, you're like, fucking hell, man. Just like say hello to everybody. Or if you're looking to move jobs as well, it's a nightmare getting in anywhere without people finding out where you are, what you've done.
Shit, yes,
It's
yes.
incredible.
Yeah, it is really tricky. I mean, it's tricky anyway, regardless
You're
of
right,
where
exactly.
I mean, you can literally be applying for jobs in China or Japan, and people still know. But over there, it's
Exactly.
even worse, I think.
Oh, I had the same experience. I had that experience when I went to Lincoln Co in Sweden, in Gothenburg. It's like I went over there to speak to some people, and it was like, bumped into so many people that I knew, and you're just trying to keep under the radar, and like you say, it's impossible. It's a
Dude.
nightmare.
So did you go to Lincoln Co?
I didn't. I decided not to in the end. But the Geely job that I took, I was kind of known by Geely because they own Lincoln Co.
Right.
And then the studio was set up in the UK, and it just kind of all fit really. So that's kind of how that came about.
Those guys seem to be taking over the world. I mean, like
They're a
them
big company,
and
man. They're a big company
they're
with a lot of
big.
ambition. Yeah, with a lot of ambition. And yeah, so they've got the kind of ability and the kind of resources to do that. Yeah. So I mean, I left just before the start of the summer. I think I've been there for 3 years, or just under 3 years. And the pace of growth is just incredible to watch. And I got the opportunity to go over to China before the lockdown, and kind of see what they were building over there, and it's pretty incredible. The facilities are absolutely mind blowing, really.
And the CEO, what's his name? Li Shifu. Is that his
Li
name?
Shifu, yeah. The founder of Geely, yeah.
But he's also a pretty young guy, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, you've got, it's very, I mean, China's a different, just a very different culture in terms of, traditionally maybe in Europe, people are of more of a certain age when they get to, positions of authority but in China it's quite regular that you'll have people that are that successful and that powerful that are relatively young, and his outlook on what he wants to achieve, they're doing incredible things. So they're investing in satellite arrays for autonomy and things like this. They're absolutely kind of going after being able to do it well, and kind of that age old kind of chicken and egg thing with mobility and electrification. Kind of infrastructure versus versus what the actual items that you're making to go on it. They're kind of doing what Elon Musk did really as well, which is kind of go, right, well, I'll sort this problem out by investing in stuff that's needed to make it work. So it's really interesting to see that ambition of a company like that.
Dude, I think that this is the thing that so many people are completely misinformed on. Especially, I mean, as you said with Geely, but also especially Tesla. There's always this focus on like, oh well, the Model X isn't selling that well. But the thing is, that guy's been building an infrastructure not just in California but all over the world.
Yeah.
Over the last, and let's not forget that he started in the recession, so they like, everybody's so short-term short-sighted in their thinking, and they pick up on details, and they fail to understand the bigger picture, and it's incredible what these guys are doing.
I mean, with Tesla, that's what it's all about, isn't it? And like you say, kind of, if you're in the automotive industry or in car design, you sometimes you tend to look at the details of the product, and and you can kind of talk about the merits of that. But then, if you're looking to actually purchase a Tesla, for example, they've got an infrastructure. They've gone out and done it. And any other car, any other EV that you look to buy, you're like, right, okay, so where am I going to charge it? How am I going to get from one place to the other? And nowadays there are systems in place, like with Ionity or with BP Pulse or things like that. But they're only just getting up to speed, whereas Tesla have been in that space and said, stop at a motorway service station and you can charge your car. And they've been there for like 5 years, 5 or 10 years. And so, yeah, it's impressive. And it's, like you say, it's a different mindset as well. It's a kind of understanding what those companies are trying to achieve as well.
Do you think some of the bigger OEMs are just kind of, I can't imagine that they can be so misinformed, but at the same time, their message that they put out there seems so stupid. I won't mention any companies specifically, but, this mindset of like, okay, well, we've got the resources to be the biggest EV manufacturer on the planet, yet they haven't really looked at like all the other things that companies like Tesla, for example, have done, like the infrastructure, and then if you look at, how far ahead they are in AI and autonomous driving and the data that they've collected, all that sort of stuff. I mean, I'm by no means an expert, but I've got quite interested in them specifically for those reasons. And it just seems like the dinosaur OEMs or the companies that have been around the longest seem to be so, what's got them to this point is like over the last 50, 80 years is not the thing that they need to do for the next 50, 80 years. They've got to really change their thinking completely.
Yeah, and you're right, and I think that's the thing. There are huge companies that need to kind of turn themselves around or invest in different areas, aren't there? And that takes time. And I also think kind of if you've got shareholders you know that creates its own issue, doesn't it? Because at the end of the day, Tesla do what Elon Musk says they're going to do, and he's like, right, we're going to do this, and they invest in it, and there's no one to answer to other than him. So he's like, right, this is what needs to be done. And I think there are other complications in other types of business that are harder to deal with. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, Tesla don't make money, you know, but that doesn't matter because of the way they're set up. So that's great. But then if you've got people, you know, if you've got a completely different kind of business, then it can make things harder, I think. And then there's also, it's also a mindset thing as well. As you say, it's like, it's taken car companies quite a long time to come to the realization that all the investment in oily bits and metal and, you know, and those traditional elements are now being superseded by software and you know, everything that goes with, you know, a connected infrastructure and ecosystem. So they're making that change, whereas disruptors that come in that have already got their ideas always get a bit of a march on it because they've already solidified this is what we're going to do, and they go and do it, rather than have to kind of take a step back and say, right, well, this is what we do now. Where are we going to go with it, if you see what I mean?
Yeah. And to your point of the various, you know, traditional elements that these companies are so heavily invested in, it seems so often that, like, for example, now, you know, it's a kind of general consensus that, like, electrification is the way to go. And it seems, and then, you know, the bigger OEMs go, okay, we're going to put all our investment into making sure that we are completely electrified within the next 5, 10, 15 years, whatever it is. So they've now got their committee of, I don't know how many hundreds, if not thousands of people to kind of give the green light on everything. And then for some other innovative tech startup to come along and say, actually, we've discovered that hydrogen is brilliant for this and this reason, and then you know, those big OEMs have to go and redress the committee and reassess what they've done. But now they've so heavily invested along with governments into this one particular platform that it's almost impossible for them to pivot in time.
Yeah, it becomes difficult. You're right, and I think it's interesting looking at how different OEMs approach electrification, because there's obviously the relatively low-cost route in, which is you essentially take an ICE vehicle and retrofit it with batteries, which is doable, and there are obviously vehicles out there that do that. And then it's an electric platform, and we've invested in it, and we will make the most out of the technology and the opportunity. And you can see the companies that are doing that versus the companies that are doing something that's, you know, the quicker, less intense option. And you're right, it's like electrification has become the route that most people are taking, but hydrogen's still out there, isn't it? And again, is electrification the route because someone like a company like Tesla kind of blew the charging infrastructure wide open? Again, it kind of shows that infrastructure issue is massive, because if you've got an infrastructure to use, people will piggyback on it and go, okay, this makes sense. But to put one in, it's completely different. You know, it's just a completely different world to be in.
Well, I spoke to a guy around Christmas time called Roger Atkins, who if you spent, I mean, he's all over LinkedIn. He's like a proper EV influencer on LinkedIn. He's got like 250,000 followers or something ridiculous. Right. But the guy is like, he calls himself like an expert generalist. Like he knows a lot to quite a decent level of like various different subjects, but he's not like just like detail, like heavily focused on one particular thing. So he speaks to, he's a brand ambassador for various companies, including Rimac, and he basically goes around speaking to like various companies, various tech startups, and he also does keynotes and all that sort of stuff. And he's a big fan of electric vehicles, and because that's kind of his niche. But he was saying that the solution is the problem is so complex that it would be a mistake for us to all of a sudden just have only electric vehicles on the road, because there's obviously a series of problems that presents as well, which, you know, a lot of like diehard petrol heads were saying, okay, well, you know, if we stop taking oil out the ground, now we're raping it for battery minerals. And so Roger was saying that the solution is like it's a hybrid solution of various different technologies. And I think that this is when you start to question, like, you know, all the other big OEMs jumping on. They seem to wait until there's like this tried and tested business model by a startup like Tesla and go, okay, well, you know, people are buying Teslas, so, you know, if we throw electric engines into our cars, people are going to buy that as well. But they seem to kind of miss the point, it seems. Although you can never be sure because it's just so complicated. But it just seems like they don't get it.
I think the way it works is that those huge companies are always invested in other technologies, but it takes something quite big for them to really throw their weight behind it. So they'll always be there in different, you know, in kind of different areas. But they have the ability, because of their size and the amount of money that they have, to when they really want to pursue something, to just go at it very, very hard, you know. And I think that's probably where it sits. But I think it's a really good point that if you look across not just vehicles, but you look across energy. Everybody who knows quite a bit about it is saying it needs to be made up of multiple alternative sources. It can't just be go in one direction, because, as you say, it's a very, very complex issue. And the minute you go for just one thing, you will create an issue of itself in that area. So it's about trying to spread it. But obviously that's quite difficult to manage sometimes. When people are making, because the choices for vehicles have been so easy, haven't they, for so long? You know, if you're a customer, what do you want to drive? Well, I'm going to drive a petrol or a diesel car. Fine, and that's it. And you know everything about that. You know, there's nothing really to understand to get to. You don't have to soak up new knowledge about how to charge a vehicle or something like that, because you just kind of. It just kind of seeps in from birth, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's true.
It's like,
it's true.
Just go to the petrol station. So it's kind of, in a way, that there's also, I think, a big piece of education for customers, you know, about don't be scared of this technology, and I think different companies approach that in different ways, but some people do the job really well of really saying to a customer, don't be worried about this, actually embrace it. Actually, there's loads of opportunity out there. There's loads of reasons this is a really cool thing. And I think you speak to quite a few people that have gone EV, for example, that are outside of the normal or the current demographic for EV uptake. And they're always quite surprised by how much they like it. And how easy they find it once they've taken that jump, you know.
The big question that I still haven't got my head around. There's the obvious thing of like where the energy comes from, but I think that's a process that, in general, the world is hopefully moving in a positive direction with regard to renewable energy. But the big question is, you know, the product life cycle, you know, and specifically like what happens to all the batteries. So they're saying that the very first electric vehicles now are coming to a stage where their batteries now are kind of, you know, they've run out. You know, we've got the first group of I don't know, discarded batteries, if you like. Do you know much about like the recyclability of batteries at all, Rob?
I don't know. I'm not really aware, or I don't know very much about the engineering of kind of what they do in terms of, if you could take, metals out of them and create new ones. But what I do know is that there was a lot of discussion about repurposing the batteries. So, they're not efficient enough to use in the car anymore. But where can you use them after that? Using them in buildings, for example, using them for backup generation in buildings and things like that. And I think that's where, that's where it's kind of gone in that regard. But you're right, it's an issue that has to be understood, because I don't know what the life cycle. I think life cycle is about 10 years at the moment. They're talking about 8 to 10 years. Most manufacturers discussing, I think. And yeah, you're right. It's like, well, okay, what happens then? That's why this is becoming such a big area for growth, I think, within not just obviously automotive, but outside of that, is really understanding it's a much bigger picture that has to somehow be framed to get the answers right, instead of just taking the problem from one place and moving it to another.
Exactly. Yeah. I just spoke to a guy that has co-founded a electric scooter startup, and they are using batteries from discarded electric vehicles. So as you highlighted, the battery might not have enough power or energy to power a car, but something smaller like a scooter, for example, it can be used. And then of course, and then that obviously goes for appliances and all that sort of stuff as well. But I mean, if you look at what we've the state that we've kind of got ourselves into with regards to just mobile phones, it's terrifying to think what the bigger picture is when you look at transport as a whole. Like, I'm kind of in the dark in it. Are we simply just is there new battery technology that we're using in cars that is different to that of phones, or are we just hoping that somebody's going to work it up before it gets too bad?
I think there's a lot of research going on, but I think essentially at the moment it's pretty similar technology. I mean, I'm not a battery expert by any means, but it's but it is lithium ion battery packs, but I think because of the explosion within vehicle manufacturing of electric vehicles, there's a lot of research going on in how you make them better and better and better and more efficient. I guess that one of the major things is going to be less vehicles. So if there are less vehicles, then there are less batteries, and that's going to be a really big area of discussion, obviously, for the automotive industry. It's like, because at the moment it's obviously always built on growth. It's built on replace. So what can be done in that area? Because things like mobility as a service, I think, is a really interesting area for car companies to explore. And different companies have started to look at those kind of things. Volvo do it. I think JLR have just started to do it, where you're paying a certain amount of money a month and you get access to X amount of cars, X amount of vehicles, and I think that is an area that more and more companies will look to go into, rather than selling you or I a unit. There you go, have one of those, and we'll sell as many of those as we possibly can. Will there be a transition where these companies go from the creators and sellers of product to the creators and sellers of service?
Well, I think almost definitely, right?
Yeah. And then that becomes a very different space to occupy as a business. And you can reduce your impact on the planet greatly by doing that, because you're not about selling unit. You're about kind of bringing people into what you can provide for them. So I think that's a big area of change that's going to happen over the next 10 years, really.
Well, the product. I mean, the product becomes part of the infrastructure, then, doesn't it? It's not actually. It's not. It's kind of, yeah. As you said, you basically selling. You are selling rights to an ecosystem rather than ownership of the actual vehicle, and it seems like that's the way that we're going.
It will become very interesting to see, how do we as consumers feel about that, and that's the thing. It's going to be, how do we feel about, I don't actually own that object, I'm using it, and will there, I'm sure people will still want to have ownership of something, and it will be really interesting to see where that goes. It's like, well, actually, I think if you're a petrol head, you kind of worry about the fact that all of these beautiful objects that create so much emotional attachment that we love so much will disappear. But actually, it might be that they become more accessible in a way, because we don't use them very much, but we can use them occasionally and actually enjoy them more. And we make that switch to thinking about our daily conveyances more like public transport, or, as I said, mobility as a service, as a shared environment. And maybe we don't need to be as worried that those beautiful objects are going to disappear, because, as I said, they might become actually more accessible. I think it'll be an interesting time.
Definitely, and I think we're still in this transition phase where these services are they still need a lot of work in terms of accessibility. The whole notion of it will completely change your mindset, where you could literally, like, the vision is you press a button on your phone, or you talk to Alexa and you say, I want a car in 10 minutes, or whatever the case is, and that car, or like through autonomous driving, ends up outside your apartment, like calling a taxi basically. Yeah. But if you've got the budget for it, you could choose to have an autonomous Porsche, or if you don't, something a bit more modest. And I think that once they've nailed the accessibility of it, and where people don't have this anxiety of like, am I going to get a car, am I not, and also the cost of it, then I think people will be at least the older generation will be a lot more open-minded to it, and I think it also depends on where you are as well. In the UK, I could never fathom not having a car, but over here it's kind of like, especially where I'm in Potsdam, it's kind of like it actually becomes a bit of a hindrance at times, because you can be faster on the tram or on your bicycle, and it's the infrastructure is geared up for that. The only issue that we have at the moment, like, is if we want to do long distance stuff. But I also think that just needs a bit of time for them to nail that, because going to like Europe Car or Sixt or whatever the case is just, it's a pain in the ass. You've got to sit there, queue, spend an hour there. You've got to fill out tons of paperwork. It's just a nightmare.
Yeah, and that's what this kind of service level approach, I think, is going to give people. It's like, if you can do what you do of a week, and be like, we don't need a vehicle. But when you do need a vehicle, it's like, right, the vehicle's going to be here tomorrow, and or it's going to be here tonight, and we'll pack the vehicle, we'll pack it up, and then we'll have our weekend away and take our journey to it, and you can trust it. Then that's the issue gone. And I think that's the key word really with all of this, is trust, isn't it? It's like you want to have a feeling of control and dependency, that I don't need to worry about anything else, because that's what a car gives you. It gives you massive independence and control. And it's like, so we need to work out, businesses need to work out, how do we give that to people within a different offer,
Yeah, it's gonna be very interesting to see how things unfold. And I think, I don't know what it's like in the UK, but over here, and I'm generalizing now, but the younger generation, for the most part, are not that bothered about cars the way that we were or are. And I think that they've they're more interested in electronics, and also, the bigger picture. They also have this cloud of being concerned about the environment, more so than maybe what we were.
Yeah, I think you're totally right, man. And as I use the phrase digital native, they are, that's a kind of that's a world that we sometimes see from outside a little bit, because it wasn't there when we were growing up. So it kind of, it was something that we had to embrace and was new. Whereas these different generations, newer generations, it's just there. It's just life. So it's very different. And you're totally right. There isn't that same attachment to personal vehicles and cars as we maybe had. But that's why I say this, like, automotive companies, I think, have to go into service providing, but there's kind of two levels of it. There's the kind of nuts and bolts of how do you make a conveyance and get it to somebody, and they have trust that it's going to happen, and why do they want your one versus someone else's one? That becomes the key then. Why do they want yours rather than that other company's? What do you do differently to them that means that you want to use that? And there's the stuff that, as I said, is kind of like the nuts and bolts, but then there's the stuff that's the same as, I love that Porsche, or I love that Ferrari, or I'm really about that old DS, or it's going to be
Emotion.
About the emotional connection still has to be there, but it's just it's a different offer, it's a different thing, but it's still about brand, and it's still about, what does that brand mean to the people that are going to use it, and that's I think a very exciting position to be in for companies, is to go right. So I think some of them know what they're all about, and they're like, right, so this is what we're all about. So we can quite easily understand how anything that we do speaks to what our brand is. And there are other brands out there that don't really know that much about themselves and need to find their way, but that's where, but that whole thing about that emotional connection to some technology or is where people that are kind of in my area of design and in branding are really excited, and I think it's going to offer up opportunities, especially if you're in that early stage within a design studio of imagining what these things are going to be. It's kind of super cool, really. It's like, okay, it's kind of like when in a way, it's like when you're at uni and you're like, I'm going to do a blue sky project. What is it all about? Something really, really different. That actually makes a lot of sense now. It's less blue sky and more about, the continued prosperity of whatever company you're working for.
Yeah, it's very true. Like, Rob, when did you start? When did you get into UX UI? Because you studied transport. I
studied car,
at Coventry. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, so I did car design, and then I worked, as a car designer, but always with a product design kind of influence and perspective. A very, very early on, I realised I wasn't an exterior designer. I could draw, but I'm not a sculptor. That was kind of not really my area, and nor was it actually an area that I was as interested in as I was about actually. If you look at like so take someone like Dieter Rams, the kind of less is more kind of approach to, you can make a really compelling object, but how does someone use it and interface with it? And so I went through did cars, did products, And then kind of almost a natural progression of that was looking at getting involved in experience and user experience. And my approach to it has always been, I've always done physical design as part of the user experience. So it's always been designing commodities as well as graphic interfaces, and then bringing them together, because I think when you're actually doing the job of user experience, a lot of people think it's graphics, but actually it's not graphics, it's how somebody interacts with an object. And in that regard, it kind of became in automotive this kind of great panacea of UX, we're going to have a UX department and they're going to do X, Y, or Z. Where actually, really, the UX designer has always existed. It's always, the chief UX designer is the head of design for any car company. Because you think the head of design for any car company, they're defining how somebody interacts with that object. So there you go. That's it. That's what it is at its pure in its purest form. So to be a UX designer, I think actually just means that you have to think about how somebody interacts with an object. That's about it, really. It's a bit fluffy, but
no, but that makes, it makes a lot of sense what you're saying. And I think that, for the most part, that's true. It seems though that there was a bit of a watershed moment for a lot of companies. It seems like maybe 2015, around there, where car companies started to get really serious about it, where they were like, okay, it's not okay for us just to go to Johnson Controls and get whatever they've got lying on the shelf, sort of thing. I'm oversimplifying it now, but it seems like that's when they started establishing really, building bigger teams to really look at this project.
I think it's always cyclical as well, isn't it? You've always got the arms race within car design, which is kind of like, okay, so they're doing this, so we're going to do this. And it goes through different areas, and I think it was one of the areas where, certain companies get in there first, and then everybody else has a look and thinks, oh, they're doing something and leveraging it, we need to do the same. And I think you're right, there kind of became a critical mass around that point for doing that kind of stuff. And the thing that I've always found, that the reason that I've been able to get on quite well within the industry, I think, is because of my background of cars and product. I kind of bridge the gap between traditional UXers and car designers. And so, I'm just as much an interior designer as I am a UXer, and that's very helpful, because I think at the end of the day, too many times within a studio environment, you get a bit siloed. It's like, these people do this, these people do this, and actually the best stuff, when it comes out, the best projects that anybody has worked on, they're usually the result of, everybody kind of crisscrossing with each other, and out comes something that you really feel is has been developed by a bunch of people with different backgrounds, but that have got one kind of vision, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. It's very true. I think I think historically there's always been this divide, as you said, like this, even if you put UX aside, for example, if you look at just interior and exterior design, it's there's this always, it's not always the case, but quite often this kind of tension between the two departments sometimes. And you think you are not, the interior is not isolated to the exterior and vice versa. It's one cohesive product. And it's so stupid and narrow-minded to get into this it's almost natural that it happens, that there is this tension between the two departments. But if you take a step back and you look at the fact that you are creating one product, it's so stupid to get into that, to fall into that trap.
Well, I think that's also obviously where really good leadership is really important. Really good design leadership, and also everybody within those teams, they need to understand what each other are trying to achieve. So it would be really silly for me to go right. So I want the inside of this car to be as spacious and as airy as possible. So I'm going to put the roof up here, and then to think and to not think anything of the fact that obviously the chief of exteriors wants it to be as low as physically possible because they want the car to look as cool as physically possible, because at the end of the day people have to want it first before they get inside it. And I think that's what designers need to do, is they need to know as much about and appreciate as much about all the aspects of it as possible, because then you'll do something that has that feel and understanding. And it goes for within a studio. For me, it's not the designers, it's everybody. It's the designers, the studio engineers, clay modelers, the cast team, everybody understanding as much about everybody else's role as possible, because then you're going to really make something that feels really clued in and connected. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.